Well, today we're going to do a dry plant extract of rosemary, Rosemarinus officinalis, and we picked some fresh rosemary sprigs, like 6 to 8, 10 inches long. A couple weeks ago we collected fresh sprigs and we just laid them out in a cardboard flat to dry, and then when it comes time to do collecting, you could use the stems if you wanted, but it's kind of nice just to go ahead and peel off and crush off the dry rosemary, and there we get a nice little pile, and then we collect that, and then we have it already here in the bowl measured out and such. But the rosemary dry plant extract is done as a 1:5 ratio, meaning 1 part herb or plant material dry to 5 parts alcohol and water. And in this case we chose to weigh out 50 grams of the dry rosemary, and so in a classic 1:5 ratio, the 50 grams, you basically times it by 5 to get the amount of liquid that you need. In this case it's alcohol and water, and we're using the metric system of milliliters here to measure it. So we basically 5 times 5 is 250 milliliters of alcohol and water, and in this case I decided to make 50% of 250. 50% will be alcohol, 95% alcohol, and 50% water. And so basically with this dry plant method, you take the amount of liquid, the total amount of liquid, and then you times it by 0.50 or 50%. If it was 60%, it would be 0.60 or 60%, and you come up with 125 milliliters is needed of the alcohol, and of the water the same way. Take 250 times 0.50 or 50%, and you come up with 125 milliliters, and for a total of 250 milliliters, and this number here should match that number there, and together you have the 1:5 ratio liquid amount for the rosemary. Here's a non-metric example just to help people out. So let's say you had 6 ounces of the dry rosemary leaf, and 6 times 5 is 30, which means you need 30 ounces of the menstruum or liquid, which is a combination of alcohol and water, and 50% of the 30 ounces is going to be alcohol, and 50% of the 30 ounces is going to be water. And of course there's the little math equation of 30 times 0.50 equals 15 ounces. And this is a very simple example, but gives you the idea that if you were using the non-metric measurement system, that this is how you go about doing it to affect a 1:5 plant ratio for dry plant extract. This 50% alcohol that I'm using is, well, rosemary leaf is light enough, and the constituents are extractable enough to deal with 50 or 60%. This is one of those plants where 50% is fine, and you can find this information out in a number of different ways. Mostly I just use Materia Medica's. Michael Moore, my old teacher at the Southwest School of Botanical Medicine, he has these amazing pamphlets. You can get these online, or you can access this information online, and many other places will give you the percentages that have been determined over 100 to 150 years of herbal medicine as to which percentage of alcohol is the best, you know, pertaining to which plant you're talking about. It's been kind of figured out. In this case, 50% is just fine for the rosemary leaf, because it's a very very delicate, very light leaf material, and 50% should be more than adequate to pull out all the oils and constituents from the rosemary leaf. And so we're just filling up the mason jar with the dry rosemary leaf. And remember, we started with 50 grams of the dry leaf of rosemary, and we're doing a 1 to 5, so 5 times 5 is 250 milliliters of alcohol and water, and in this case it's 50% alcohol, 50% water. Pretty straightforward. We take and we pour the, sometimes it's a little tricky filming and pouring at the same time, but it'll take a while for the rosemary leaf to kind of get saturated. So I'm just shaking it up a little bit, and you can see that in time the rosemary leaf will absorb all the alcohol and water and totally kind of move down towards the bottom of the jar. It takes a little bit of time, but my goal is to try to get as much of the material covered by alcohol. In this case, it'll probably take 15-20 minutes for all that rosemary to absorb and to move down to the bottom of the jar, but I'm going to have plenty of fluid to cover the material in time. And eventually I'll be able to get all the little pieces down under the level of liquid. But that is essentially going to be a rosemary dry plant 1 to 5 extract. And just to go over it real quickly, almost all dry plant extracts are done at a 1 to 5 ratio, meaning 1 part herb to 5 parts alcohol and water. And the amount we used here was 50 grams of the dry material. We needed 250 milliliters, and we got that number by doing a 5 times 5 and 250, and that's pretty much how you always determine the amount of liquid that you need. And in this case it was 50% alcohol, 50% water, which makes the math really easy to end up. And for the non-metric user, here's the example of 6 ounces of the dry rosemary leaf, and you do 6 times 5 is 30 ounces of alcohol water combination that you need, and it's 50-50%. And there's the final math that allows us to have the correct volume of measured liquid to make our dry plant extract. And this is a very simple, very elegant way, and we used organic alcohol from a company called Alchemical Solutions, and their alcohol comes at 190 proof. And if you want to know the percentage of alcohol, you take the proof number and you divide by 2, and in this case you come up with 95% alcohol, which is more than adequate for our extract and allows the oils and resins and the chemical constituents in rosemary to be extracted very, very effectively. And sometimes in many of the old Materia Medicas and even some modern updated Materia Medicas, you can find the percentages of alcohol that have been determined to be the most appropriate depending on which plant you're using. And it's very helpful information, because sometimes you can get away with or 50% alcohol is adequate, and in other cases you need 60, 70, 80% alcohol with your dry plant extracts, just because the chemistry of the plant requires such. And there's a lovely, lovely sprig of fresh rosemary, and there's the dry rosemary, and that's all we used for the extract was the leaf that was taken off of that. And so very simple and very elegant example of a dry plant extract. I've been using rosemary for 20 some years, and I consider it in the top 10 of my most used herbal medicines. It's an excellent plant for circulation. It has a lot of antibacterial, antimicrobial properties. It's good for vasodilation and improving circulation, especially with tiny little capillaries. And in any time we can improve circulation in the body, especially in the tiniest of capillaries, you can begin to affect a whole series of chronic illnesses, which basically eventually stem from poor circulation, especially poor lymphatic circulation. Rosemary contains a nice array of bioflavonoids, and these flavonoids are very good at rebuilding capillary function and making for stronger capillary function. So a very versatile plant. I mean, there's the 2,000 years of written history of rosemary being used as an herbal medicine, and you can find more information about rosemary on some of my other videos that go into a little bit more depth of the medicinal uses. But thank you. I'm Michael Cottingham, and this has been a Voyage Botanica presentation on herbal medicine making dry plant extract using rosemary as our example. Thank you very much.